Hello, this is Chan Abraham from Daybreak Ministries. Today I'd like to invite you as my listeners to think a little about the ways in which we can begin to really make a positive difference in our world and to transform things from where they are at the moment to being much better. In doing so, I'd like to share with you some thoughts about the nature of some of the problems, not to depress us, but to enable us to start thinking about the solutions. Now, one of our great journalists and authors of the late 19th and the 20th century was G.K. Chesterton. And he said, whenever you remove any fence, always pause long enough to ask why it was put there in the first place. You see, I think that we have some really serious issues confronting us in Britain today, but they're not the ones that politicians and certainly not the media are telling us to focus on. I think the really serious issues are the fact that we've removed some of the most basic boundaries that used to help us as human beings to understand how we ought to live. And throughout the 20th century, one of our greatest journalists who particularly addressed these issues in his later life was Malcolm Muggridge. Born in 1903, he died in 1990. Muggridge was an English journalist and satirist. As a young man, he was a left-wing sympathizer, but he later became a forceful anti-communist. During World War II, he worked for the British government as a soldier and spy, and he helped bring Mother Teresa to popular attention in the West. In his later years, when he came away from being an agnostic, someone who was not sure, to becoming a convinced Christian, he was outspoken on religious and moral issues. He took to frequently denouncing the new sexual laxity of the swinging 60s on radio and television, and he particularly commented about pills and pot, about birth control pills and cannabis. He became a Christian in 1969 and published Jesus Rediscovered, a collection of essays, articles, and sermons on faith which became a bestseller. He was also a leading figure in the nationwide Festival of Light in 1971, protesting against the commercial exploitation of sex and violence in Britain and advocating the teaching of Christ as the key to recovering moral stability in our nation. And this is interesting. He said at the time, the media today, press, television and radio, and of course we can begin to add what's happening in social media, are largely in the hands of those who favor the present Gadarene slide into decadence and godlessness. What's the relevance of this for us today? Well, remember my quote from G.K. Chesterton right at the beginning. Whenever you remove any fence, always pause long enough to ask why it was put there in the first place. You see, here's the point. We have had boundaries in our country for nearly 2,000 years, which are based upon the Bible, upon the Judeo-Christian way of life. They stood us in good stead. Today we live in chaos, in uncertainty, in ambiguity about even what it means to be human. And I believe this is because we have thrown off from us the essential boundaries that we had in our Judeo-Christian heritage. We need to return to what we had. In the Psalm 33 verse 12, it says this, "Blessed and prosperous is that nation who has God as their Lord. They will be the people who has chosen for his own." I think we have a real possibility to recover a much better Britain, and we do it by rebuilding our fences and rediscovering our wonderful heritage which is found in the Bible.